All right, we're almost there. We have our character stepping, and those two steps are looking pretty good. Again, all of that is happening on these keyframes between frame 15 and frame 47. Now, I want to show you something in another version of Maya to make this make sense. I'm going to go ahead and delete these keyframes, and we're going to do something kind of simple on this ball. Right? I'm going to make this ball animate in sort of a simple pattern here. So we'll hit S on frame 1, go to frame 20, move it out to here. I'm going to hit S to keyframe everything. Actually, let's not go that far. Let's go like here. And then in between there, I'm going to raise this up and hit S. And so now we have this animation. And if I open up my graph editor, where you can see the curves on that, this makes sense, right? Our a couple of things that are happening. Our translate Z, the ball is moving forward. Just because the angle, that means our curve is moving downward, right? We also have our translate Y, where the ball moves up and then back down, right? So we get up, back down. And so these are the keyframes that are used to define this motion. And the rest of these things, there's not really very much happening on them. So these three keyframes are reusable, right? We've learned already that I can hold Shift and highlight this region. And if I right click and say copy, I could go out here to frame 40 and paste that. And now if we look at our translate Y, now we have two little hops. And in our translate Z, we have the ball going back to the beginning again, right? So we go forward, and then the ball transitions back, and then does another forward jump, right? Because we have that transition from the end of the old animation back to the beginning of that animation again. Now, I'm going to undo that and show you that if I highlighted all of this again, right click, copy, and I pasted it on top of 20, it's going to paste over that end keyframe, right? And so now what I get is something that doesn't really work quite as well. But you kind of get the idea of what's happening. We're pasting these three keyframes later. But I'm going to show you another little trick. Now, if I highlight all of these again and copy them, and then I go to frame 20 and I right click and say paste connect, it's not going to overwrite that keyframe with the original frame. It's going to paste it in at the location of where this frame is. So if I go to paste connect, instead of overwriting it, it just continues it downward. And so now what we get is a jump forward and then another jump forward. And I can keep doing that. Paste connect, and it will keep getting bigger and bigger, right? It'll keep bouncing more and more into the end. So I can paste those keyframes at the end of this translate Y, but since on translate Z, but because the beginning and end pose were exactly the same on translate Y, it always seems to end up back at the same height. Right? Now, if that weren't the case, let's undo a few of those. Let's say this ended a couple of units higher. Right? If I copy and pasted these keyframes now, copy, and then I'll paste connect a few times here, you'll see what we're getting is this is not only moving forward, it's also going to go higher and higher and higher. So if we wanted something to repeat infinitely forward in one direction, we just have to make sure that the parts that need to stay the same are the same on the first and last keyframe, and the parts that need to continue to progress forward need to go ahead and change, right? So our walk cycle is like that, right? Our character's up and down motion is the same all the way through this. The only thing that's really changing on our pose on frame 15 and our pose on frame 47 is that the whole character was slid forward some, right? So what we can do is select our character, and as long as frame 15 and frame 47 is the same pose, just slid forward, I can copy all of this animation and right click and say copy, right click, paste, paste connect, and go out here to the end, paste, paste connect again. And what I get now is my character continuing to walk forward. And in theory, I could have my character continue to walk forward forever. Now, what I usually like to do is end this animation, sort of like bring it to a stop in the same way that I kind of started it, right? And so usually what I'll do is like right about here, I'll spend just a little bit of time, maybe out to frame 130. I'll spend a little bit of time just sort of stopping my character. So I'll go to frame 120. I think we need to go ahead and extend our environment too a little bit here. Give them a runway. Lock that back. And so by frame 20 or 120, I can go ahead and sort of not zero my character back out, but at least rotate some of this stuff down. Probably need to slide that forward just a little bit and get it down there on the ground. Go ahead and move my character forward into that. Go ahead and get this foot up here and sort of stopped as well. So I'll kind of just go ahead and end my character on a pose that I like. And again, the way I started it, I gave it just a little bit of personality by, aiming the knee a little bit and just making him feel a little bit more casual. Well, that's kind of where I'll end it as well, something like that, right? But we're going to get like a pretty boring transition into that. And so I need to sort of finish that up a little bit by adding a few more keyframes. So one of the things I sometimes do is I'll go ahead and set that keyframe on 130, and then on frame 120, I'll have the character sort of overshoot that pose a little bit. Like he goes a little bit too far on that last step, right? Maybe something like this, settles in. And that way what can happen is he can sort of step into it, go too far, and then settle back, right? And then the way I have him go into that would be one more kind of little step. Copy that keyframe on the foot, so that goes down quickly. Probably should happen over just about 2 frames. And then the rest of this, actually let me undo that shifting of the key. Go ahead and on 115, go ahead and have the character kind of pushing forward, getting me sort of another little passing pose practically, right? This is how we're going to get into that last step. So I'll make this kind of a combination passing and up, something like this. Let me zero that toe out, zero that ball out. Set everything there. Maybe shift that forward just a touch. That way it gives us enough time for a little bit of a contact pose here for the landing. But instead of this contact pose being heel out, I'll go ahead and make him sort of contact on the toe. Right there, right? So sort of roll up on the toe. Maybe give the character a little bit more time to ease into that. I think he overshoots a little far. I also think that this whole stop is probably a little fast. So this is my last contact pose. I'll just highlight all of this and sort of stretch it out. Right click and say snap to keyframes. And let's see how that stop feels. Okay. Still needs some work, especially on that overshoot right there, which is on the character's translate Z. So let's go to my animation or my graph editor, translate Z, sort of hit F to focus in there. And you can sort of see why that didn't work. There we go. And maybe that's even a little too far forward. Maybe something like that. Now you'll notice a couple of little things like this right here. That key right there. So because I haven't broken any of my tangents, I'm just going to go ahead and select everything and make sure that all of my interpolation is happening in auto tangent mode. There we go. And you saw a few of them sort of settle in there. And sometimes those tangents just mess up when we paste stuff in. And so I think that this is going to look a little bit better now. And there would still be plenty of stuff I could polish around and make better on those curves. There we go. We kind of get a little bit of a settle to a stop now. And if I really wanted to, probably what I would do, select all of that and sort of this last key pose here, 130. Would stretch that out to 135, and then I would steal what is ever at 133, just hit S, and move that back. And what that's going to do is it's going to kind of make it feel like we settle into that, like it's like eases in that last few frames. So now we have our entire animated walk cycle, and really we're pretty much just ready to render. Again, there are things that we could change in this, in terms of little bitty polish things in the graph editor. Maybe that heel comes down a little hard at the very end, or maybe we can adjust some stuff. But overall, I really like this. The one last thing I would show you in the graph editor that I think is kind of neat is that the graph editor is capable of making some pretty big changes. So let's say you were doing this for an animation studio, and your boss watched it and said, you know what, the character needs to feel a little bit more confident. Could you make him feel a little more confident, or her feel a little more confident? And so one of the things that I might think would do that is just to rotate the character back like this a little bit. And that's a lot of keyframes to change to do that. But what I can do is I can go to that rotate X channel, and I could just rotate or push that whole curve up and down to make that happen, right? And so now I can make my character feel a little more confident in that walk. Or if I really wanted to, I could make the character feel maybe a little more depressed by adjusting those two channels, and now more of a depressed walk, right? So recognize that the graph editor is really powerful for making sweeping changes pretty quickly. So I know it can be a little bit of a headache when you first start working in it, but playing in this will really help you make the animation much more polished.